Hi guys, the first database service we're going to cover is the Amazon RDS service. So RDS stands for Relational Database Service, and this is a managed relational database. So relational is a type of database which means that you have more of a rigid schema. So the database defines the rows and the columns, and you have to define that at the outset and then stick to it. Whereas with a non-relational database, which we'll be covering also in this section, you get a lot more flexibility. So RDS actually runs on Amazon EC2 instances. So when you launch your database, you have to choose the EC2 instance type that you want to use. And obviously that has an impact on cost because the different instance types have different amounts of CPU and memory and other capabilities and storage. So you have to choose your instance type carefully to make sure you give your database what it needs, but you can actually change the instance type at any time. Now it does incur downtime, so if you do find that you run out of memory, for example, you can change to another instance, but your database will be taken offline while that happens. Let's have a look at the different engines that are supported. So with RDS, you can use Amazon Aurora. This is Amazon's own proprietary database technology. There's MySQL, MariaDB, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and PostgreSQL. Now, of course, for all of these except for Amazon Aurora, you could just launch an EC2 instance and then install this database software yourself. And you might do that if, for instance, you want to have control at the actual EC2 instance level. So it means that you will then have root access, so full administrative privileges to the operating system of EC2. The downside to that is, though you gain some of that flexibility, you lose out on the managed service which you get with RDS. So with RDS, you don't get access to the operating system, but you do have a managed service. So things like patching and backups are taken care of automatically for you. So it's a great service. And as you'll see soon, the way that you can scale your performance in terms of reads and provide multi-AZ failover for high availability and disaster recovery. Those are also features you get with RDS. And if you try to do that yourself, it's a lot more complex. So there are a couple of ways that you can scale Amazon RDS. As I mentioned before, at any time you want, you can change the instance type. So this would be an example of scaling up. So you're saying, well, I've got an M4 instance type with 2 vCPUs and 8 GB of RAM, so that's a dbm4.large, and I'm running out of memory, for example, so I need a bit more. So why don't I change my instance type to an M4.2 extra large, and that has 32 GB of RAM, so now I've got lots of memory. So as I mentioned, that will incur downtime, but that's a way that you can increase the performance of your RDS database. The other way that you can scale RDS is by scaling out, and you can also add disaster recovery as well. So let's look at what features are available to do that. So firstly, we have something called multi-AZ. So multi-AZ is the disaster recovery technology. In this case, you have your RDS master. So this is your main database. This is the one that your applications are actually reading and writing to. So it's a live database. That database is then replicating synchronously to a standby database. So that's in another availability zone. By the way, synchronous replication literally means that when you replicate something, you wait for the destination to respond to you and confirm that it's received that update. And so it's a very good way of making sure that your database is consistent. But it does mean that there can be a performance penalty because of that, because you have to wait for that return response coming back, acknowledging that the update has been written. So anyway, back to multi-AZ. You've got your master, you have your standby, and you're replicating to that standby. So the standby is not actually used, it's just there and available. So if your master failed for some reason, you would then be able to use your standby. It would then become the new master. So it's a passive standby, and it's primarily used for disaster recovery. So outside of disaster recovery, the other thing I'm going to show you on this slide is how you can scale out. So we scaled up in the last slide where we changed our instance type and we gave it more CPU and memory, and we can give more storage as well. Scaling out is where you add an additional database. In this case, it's called a read replica, and it's only used for reads. So it uses asynchronous replication. That just means it doesn't wait for a response to confirm the data has been updated. And the read replica is therefore used only for applications to read traffic. So you can configure your application to say, I'm going to use the read replica if I need to query the database, and I'm going to use the master if I'm going to write data to the database. So they only scale queries, in other words, reads. And this is how you might configure your applications. So we've got two application servers, and we can see that the writes, the database writes, are going to the master, and the reads are going to the read replica. So that means you can offload some of the queries from your main database. So that means you might have a bit less of a performance hit on your master database. So just try to remember the difference between these two. It will be useful to you if you're going to use RDS. So read replicas is all about offloading read performance from the master. And then the multi-AZ is for disaster recovery, so that if your master fails, you can fail over to your standby. So that's it for a quick overview of RDS. And in the next lesson, we're going to go into the management console and we're going to launch some RDS instances.